John Wilner. You know, there was a time back when the USC and UCLA story popped, and there were things that John was, and there got to be that, and we almost kind of like had a truce in a way when we hoped that we helped a little bit with all this Pac-12 and Big 12, and there was so much stuff. A lot of people were worried about what was going on. Not only fan bases or universities or programs, but alumni and, you know, who you're going to cover, what conferences are going to be a part of. We've been through that a handful of times in the Big 12, so, you know, there was a little bit of that looking down the nose at the Big 12, and I think that having John on a handful of times has been good. He loves this show. He might be watching right now, and he's done a hell of a job, quite frankly, with this story about the money. Now, I sent a copy of it because he sent me a copy and paste version of Pac-12 financial mess. Clarity emerges as Comcast overpayment took executives by surprise. We had John on Monday, John Wilner. We also had Bob Thompson on Monday. So let's put that up again if you don't mind, Garrett. This is the story. What happened with the Pac-12 financial mess? How could it possibly owe Comcast the money? We cracked the code. All right, for those who can't get on it because it's a pay site, how do we try to explain they cracked the code? What did John report that perhaps we didn't know at this time yesterday?
Well, this story has been pretty fascinating to me in that from what we kind of assumed it was on Friday to what it's turned into has taken several different turns in that the hiding of the money right now doesn't really appear to be all that malicious or like, you know, all that. It wasn't like some grand scheme. It was a dispute over where Comcast believes it's overpaid. The Pac-12 networks think that Comcast...
No, they thought at the time that they were being underpaid.
Thought at the time they were being underpaid. So that's where the conflict started. Now, how it grew to where it did, where this is only coming out now 6 years after the initial audit, is, you know, there's still some murkiness there, but the Pac-12 network doesn't know how many subscribers it really has on Comcast. And there's two different ways to subscribe to it, or several different ways. You can have the national feed on your sports feed, and then you can take one of the regional feeds, because the Pac-12 network had this idea of they were going to have a national version, and then if you lived, you know, in Oregon and Washington, you'd get the feed that focuses on those four schools. If you lived in the Four Corners, you'd get the ones.
Like what Valley used to be, or Southwest Sports.
Exactly. So you'd have that. So those
Fox Sports Southwest.
So those are different tiers and different things you can have. So Comcast.
All right, so how come they can't get the numbers?
Well, Comcast doesn't share subscriber numbers. No one does. Netflix will come out, for example, just to make it simpler, and they'll say, this is the most watched show we've ever had on Netflix. And then people go, well, how do you know? And like, yeah, we know. And then you're like, well, can we see? Like, no, you can't.
The two guys both were fired that were a part of it. One was just Shuker, I think his name was on the job for like 3 or 4 months. Bob Thompson even mentioned that earlier. Craig, I sent that to you as well. What it looks like is that you know, both of them thought the other person was like not doing right, and now you find out what the Comcast overpaid $50 million, and it's going to be a couple of $1 million a year over the next couple of years for certain schools, and that will be taken out. But it does seem to be like, what in the world? At the worst time is the Pac-12's trying to get their stuff straight for a new media and TV deal.
Yeah, it's a weird story that if it wasn't college football related, then nobody in our audience would probably care about.
Yep.
That, you know, the fact that it's involving a conference that's, you know, not only a major college football conference, but also one that's in the midst of negotiations for a brand new TV deal that's going to position it for the next probably 5 years or so, somewhere in the pecking order. I mean, we're all interested to know what their numbers are going to look like, but yeah, it just seems like the two sides just pointing fingers at one another and not really willing to be all that cooperative towards one another. So, yeah, I mean, I read the story. Paul has a better memory than I do from reading. I could tell just by the way he's reciting it off. But, yeah, basically, you know, not being able to see the subscriber data, you can't really prove that you're being overpaid or underpaid. You just – no, our numbers say this, but Comcast is like, but you don't have the full numbers. So how could you know how much one way or the other? It's very odd how it's kind of like standoffish on equal sides of no, it's your fault, no, it's your fault. How can we prove it? And nobody really has the wherewithal or the want to actually prove why the other side is wrong and why they're right. It's weird. But yeah, just an ugly headline that was not necessary, and with just some better management and really communication. I think that's the thing that's puzzling to people like Bob Thompson is the chain of communication was a lot foggier than it should have ever been, and there should have been at some point Shooker or the other guy should have reported to someone differently, but instead it got lost somewhere in the communication pass, and therefore some people that probably needed to hear something previously or sooner, or maybe a group that needed to hear it sooner and could have acted on it quicker, never heard it in time. You know,
or
like
some ignored it.
Or ignored it and didn't believe it was true. And so there's a lot of that to this of like, no, we don't believe you. We'll prove it. Well, we're not going to show you this. And there's a lot of that. And so it does make more sense how everybody could have just not acted really, or I guess the audit was an action, but not necessarily for that. That's how it was discovered. So, yeah, just a lot of inaction, really, and finger-pointing is how they ended up where they were, it appears at least.
Yeah, here's Bob Thompson. He responded to the John Wilner story in the San Jose Mercury News and the Pac-12 hotline. And by the way, a lot of John Wilner's story yesterday, and he said this, a lot of sources who helped that were not attached to any of the schools involved, the Pac-12 or others, but a problem I see. Yeah, this is from Bob Thompson, based on trying to condense this. And some of you are in the chat room or text line or watching this. You're like, okay, what's the story? It's a pay site. The bottom line is the story's title. Leave that up if you don't mind, Garrett, for a second. The story's title, Pac-12 Financial Mess. Clarity emerges as Comcast overpayment took executives by surprise. I want to get to Larry Scott, by the way, the former commissioner and Pac-12 network president here in a minute. A problem I see is article states, the Wilner article, that $5 million is 4% of the network's annual revenue. And in August of 2022, it was estimated profits of $30 million annually for the Pac-12 networks. The $5 million is the bottom line calculations, which is 16.7% of profits, enough to move the needle on comp calculations. So that's one thing that Bob Thompson put out there. And I can get a little bit jumbled on a lot of numbers. The other one he put out there was this. Keep digging. A theory on why Comcast discovered in October Dish is sued in October by the Pac-12 over pandemic rebates and other withheld payments. Comcast decides to look at this because if Dish thinks they can do this, maybe we can too. They do the audit and uncover the fact that they've been overpaying the Pac-12. Crazy. It's complicated. We kind of watch this as we go on. It might have John on again before it's all said and done. All right?
I just want to get to a station in life where I can overpay someone $5 million and not notice it.
That's a drop in the bucket.
That would just be like, oh.
It's a drop in the bucket.
I mean, like, then when it gets to 50, then I get pissed. But if I overpay you $5 million, and then I can just be like, hey, I gave you $5 million.
If slowly but surely, someone who works at the cash register, slowly but you count, you have money, you sign things up. But if somebody slowly but surely is taking $50 a day, who works the cash register, and it goes on for months, that ends up being a very large chunk of money, and you hear stories about that. So in this case, it's just we're talking millions because it's TV and a college football conference, a college athletics conference.
I just came across Awful Announcing's write-up of it. I think they put it probably the best summary of it because it's all very confusing, especially Bob, who's got more of the TV lingo and, you know, kind of knows the ins and outs of it. So they did an independent investigation, right? Pac-12 auditors do their own investigation. They each come to the same conclusion that Comcast is paying too much money, okay? Pac-12 would need to reimburse them at some point for the overpayments. So the reason why it didn't get noticed was the Pac-12, as you mentioned, didn't have the subscriber data from Comcast, and they were never going to have access to that. So Comcast was paying the Pac-12 using their own data, and the error is that Comcast paid the conference twice as much as they should have for what they refer to as a small amount of subscribers. And the reason why it went unnoticed for so long was the results were so different than what they expected that they didn't close the audit. So therefore, they never came to a final determination, and therefore they never informed Comcast. So Comcast just kept paying. So the numbers just keeps adding up and adding up to all the way to where you just get $50 million all of a sudden that you're owed
10 years, 5 years,
yeah. So the audit would never close, so they just kept overpaying, and nobody came to, like, there was no end to it. They just kept on going business as usual to where it finally added up, and it wasn't necessarily an intentional act, so to say, but yeah, eventually the other audit, wait a second, and there you go. Wait, we owe $50 million. The biggest thing is just had they not noticed that when they did here recently, that would have just kept going on and on and on. It would have just kept on, like, to the point where, you know, who knows what it would have ballooned to at some point before eventually people realized, oh, wow. So anyways, like you said, it doesn't appear that there was like some malicious like set up to steal money from the Pac-12 and hoard it and or whatever, anything like that. It was just mistakes were made.
Communication issues. And where's Larry Scott in all this?
That's the one I was just about to bring up to you, Smokey, is, okay, so where's Larry Scott in all this? Because if I have this audit that says that we've been overpaid by $5 million, and I don't think that we have, then I would maybe want to get this resolved before something like this happened, you know, because then here's the thing. Those two guys who got fired are never really going to be able to wash this off, are they? Because of the first couple days. So while there may have been no malicious intent, it was a little bit negligent, maybe a lot of it negligent, to not just address the situation right out and get it out in the open. Because if, you know, you say, look, we've got this overpayment, we think we're underpaid, you think we're overpaid, let's get this, you know, determined so we don't keep having to do this, and it doesn't build up to where one day you guys ask for an audit and you think you owe us $50 million. So that's where I think Larry Scott's got to be in all this, where he should have said, like, look, let's get this worked out. And
I know you guys said yesterday, and you kind of didn't scoff at it, but there are going to be some communication if it gets to a point where it gets ugly. There's going to be communication somewhere, whether it's email, I don't know about text messages or whatever. But it is kind of unfortunate. It's more than anything else. The money, they'll take care of that in a couple of years. It's because the Pac-12 is trying to work on their TV deal, and it kind of just brings a little bit of a
well, on the surface, it looks like it could be a massive scandal, and that's why it's interesting to begin with.
We thought that, but it's not.
It's not after you actually see what's going on. But when the headline first comes out, your reaction is like, wait, what? And yeah, could this potentially torpedo a TV deal? That's why everybody was interested in it. The more it comes out that it was just human error, basically, I think people lose interest in it, quite frankly. It's not nearly as fascinating of a story when it's just, oh, just people made dumb mistakes or didn't communicate. Oh, okay. That happens all the time. It was far juicier when it was like, wait, there's two executives from the Pac-12 who are stealing millions of dollars from the – that's what was interesting. But that's not the case as more information comes out. So I don't think the story is as interesting, although on the Pac-12 side of things, obviously it plays into their TV deal, and so that is of interest to an extent. But to your point about what we were talking about yesterday, one scoffing at text message. If you're trying to pull off a crime, you don't text about it, and you don't make that's the thing.
I'm telling you, there are fingerprints everywhere.
I understand that. Yeah, I understand. I watch enough true crime to realize that there's no real way to get away with anything. But yeah, the whole idea that you were just openly texting about this, like it was, you know, not going to ever be discovered. Just these people seem too smart for that. But maybe I'm giving them too much credit.
You know, people that, and I read a book about this, or people that walk into like convenience stores, or people who walk into grocery stores, or let's just say it could be a place that's got auto parts. Those who steal things like that, physical product, the cameras that are everywhere, it's like that doesn't matter to them, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to steal.
Yeah.
They're going to go and get couple of shock absorbers, or I don't know what it might be.
Yeah, they
don't even think about that.
Yeah, most theft is not like Ocean's 11. Although, wouldn't it be great if it was?
And those people are still also not high-ranking TV executives or conference, affiliated vice presidents and whatnot that are probably getting paid pretty healthy salaries.
All right, C.J. Moore from The Athletic will